the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find, maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been, but there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the fourth time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close, but having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it, but one random night I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move, complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it. Or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window. And just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier. If it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Most nights I fall asleep to some form of sound. It's the best way I know how to knock out quickly. Sometimes it's a chess video, sometimes it's a podcast about space, sometimes it's just a recording of a thunderstorm. You get the idea. I'm a very active dreamer, so whatever I fall asleep to usually gets translated directly into my dreams in some form. For example, if I fall asleep to a soccer compilation, then it's likely I'll have a dream about playing soccer. Part of the reason this is so clutch is because I had a ton of nightmares growing up, and this technique prevents them. This happened a couple of weeks ago during a sleepover at my friend Duncan's place. It was a sleepover, so I had to fall asleep normally. That wasn't an issue for me. It just meant my dreams would be a lot less predictable. There were 3 of us, me, Duncan, and Ian. Duncan's parents were away for the weekend, which is why we were having the sleepover in the first place. He has a lot of big, comfy couches in his living room, so that's where we all slept. That night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've had in a while. I was out at sea on a small sailboat. I don't even know where it came from. I've never been on a sailboat in my life. The water was super choppy, and I remember the sky being this weird mix of dark purple and gray. The wind was howling, but not in a scary way. It kind of felt like I was in a movie or something. Then the boat lurched. I couldn't see what we hit, but I definitely felt it. Whatever it was, it knocked the whole sail sideways and cracked something underneath. Water started gushing in through the bottom, and I remember trying to plug the hole with my jacket, which obviously wasn't doing anything. I started panicking, like full-on helpless panic, and just as the boat started to sink, a dolphin jumped out of the water, locked eyes with me, and said in perfect English, "Wake up." That instantly snapped me awake. I'm usually pretty groggy after waking up, but this was different, although I didn't know why yet. I looked around the room, trying to figure out if anything was different or strange, but everything looked normal. My friends were sleeping next to me, and the living room was exactly how we left it. You know that weird in-between phase right after you wake up where you can't really process information accurately? That's what I was experiencing. A few seconds later, though, my brain started functioning properly, and I picked up on a sound that was definitely out of place. There was this distinct rushing sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't muffled like you'd expect if a faucet was just dripping. It was consistent, like a hose or something. That must have been why I had that wonky dream about the ocean. I sat there for a second, trying to figure out what I was hearing. Then, like an idiot, I got up to check it out myself. I crept up the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. The noise got louder with each step. It was definitely running water, and it was coming from the upstairs bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly cracked open, and even from a distance I could see the sink. One of the knobs was turned all the way to the right. The water was just gushing out, full blast. There was no way that could have happened on its own. It didn't even make sense. I got close to the doorway and was about to step in, but something made me stop. The bathroom up there is pretty big. It's got this long counter and a bathtub with a curtain, plus this awkward corner where the toilet is. Plenty of blind spots. For all I knew, someone could have been crouching behind the tub or standing right behind the door. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but I just couldn't go in. I backed up and booked it down the stairs to wake up Duncan. I shook him hard and told him something was wrong. At first, he was groggy, but the urgency in my voice must have gotten through. because he sat up and asked what was going on. I told him the sink upstairs was blasting and I thought someone was in the house. That woke him up real fast. We left Ian asleep on the couch and crept back up together. When we got to the bathroom door, Duncan didn't even hesitate. He pushed it open and stepped inside. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Almost immediately, a figure lunged from around the corner and tackled Duncan from the side. It happened so fast. All I saw was Duncan go down and this guy swinging a piece of PVC pipe like he was about to beat the crap out of him. I didn't think, I just threw myself at the guy, trying to get him off Duncan. We both piled on him and wrestled him to the floor, but he was bigger than both of us. It was pure chaos. Eventually, the guy broke free and bailed, shoving both of us to the side and sprinting for the stairs. By the time Duncan and I made it to the porch, he was gone. The police showed up maybe 30 minutes later, but they weren't much help. They determined that the entry point was a downstairs window, which was wide open and had been previously unlocked. Duncan's family doesn't have cameras in their house, so there was no evidence we could turn over. The police said that it was likely that it had just been a burglar committing a random attack, but my friends and I think it was way more specific than that. First of all, why would a burglar purposely make noise by turning on a sink faucet in the first place? Yeah, it was obviously a trap to lure someone upstairs, but what was the point if he was trying to rob the place? This makes me think he had a more sinister intention, one I can't fully explain. Duncan is convinced that whoever broke in knew his parents were out of town and had expected only one person to be there that night, him. If that's true, then I can only imagine that whoever had broken in intended on seriously injuring or killing Duncan. I don't even like to think about what would have happened had I gone in that upstairs bathroom by myself. This happened on a Friday night a couple months back. My girlfriend's parents had planned a weekend trip out of town, some kind of anniversary thing, I think. So naturally, my girlfriend Bonnie invited me to stay at her place. Normally, her parents are pretty strict, and sleeping over in her room is definitely off limits, but since they'd be gone the whole weekend, we figured it wouldn't hurt anyone. Bonnie lives in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every house looks the same, quiet enough that by 10 o'clock it always feels deserted. Honestly, that place creeps me out a little whenever I leave late at night, so I was relieved at the thought of just staying put for once. I showed up around 8, brought snacks, and we watched a movie. The usual stuff. Bonnie's room is on the second floor facing the backyard, and from her window, you can just barely see into the dense line of trees that borders their property. They don't have much exterior lighting, so at night it's pitch black out there, like looking straight into a void. Bonnie has a queen-size bed, so we both had plenty of space, enough that we could stretch comfortably without crowding each other. I'll skip the rest of the irrelevant stuff. We eventually turned off the TV around midnight and drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep, but I vividly remember the unsettling dream that followed. Now, before I tell you about it, I want to say one thing. I've only had a false awakening dream a couple of times in my life before. This night was one of them. For anyone who's never had one, it's a really strange and almost transcendent experience. Dreams like the one I'm about to describe are actually the main reason I believe there are things in this world beyond those that we can see. In the dream, I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere downstairs. Before I could even process it, rapid footsteps started racing up the stairs. Without hesitation, I shot up in the bed with the intention of intercepting whoever had broken in, but something stopped me. Bonnie's room looked identical to how it had looked when we went to sleep. Every detail exactly as it should have been, except for one thing that I could still picture in my mind's eye even now. A thin yellow glow spilling into the bedroom from the crack beneath the bedroom door. It was just a sliver of light, but for some reason, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. All my confidence was gone. My vision began tunneling into this little bar of light as everything else started fading to black. The footsteps made it up the stairs and started storming towards the door, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was frozen. And then, silence. I was still fixated on the light below the door when the voices started. At first, it was just one voice, a woman's voice, saying all sorts of nasty things about me. Insults about my appearance, my outlook on life, my future. But then things started getting more personal. It knew things about me, deeply personal things I'd never shared with anyone, not even Bonnie. It started reciting events from my past, things I had said, things I had done, things no stranger would know, things no stranger could know. One voice became two became three, and before I knew it, there were 100 voices tormenting me with my darkest, most repressed secrets. It genuinely felt like the darkest pieces of my brain were being dragged out of my head and thrown under a microscope. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, bolted across the room, and swung open the bedroom door, ready to confront whoever was harassing me. But the instant the door opened, every light in the house snapped off, and I was plunged into pure darkness. The voices stopped, and the air turned ice cold, sharp enough to sting my skin, and for a split second, it felt like I'd stepped into another world entirely. I stumbled backwards in a disoriented haze until I found the bed, then scrambled under the covers like I was 6 years old again. And then I woke up, only I was still dreaming at that point. I just didn't know it. I sat up slowly, obviously still scared, but trying to reassure myself that the nightmare was over. But to my horror, when I looked at the bedroom door, I saw that same beam of light pouring into the room. And then I heard it. The downstairs door slamming shut again, followed by those same frantic footsteps stomping up the stairs. The entire sequence replayed itself with agonizing precision. The footsteps stopping at the door, the voices, the secrets, the whole thing. I couldn't help myself. I again ran towards the door and threw it open, only to experience that same cold darkness as before. When I finally woke up for real, my heart was racing. I was 75% sure I had actually woken up, but I was so disoriented from the strangeness of that double false awakening dream that I couldn't be sure. Bonnie was sound asleep next to me, completely unaware of what I had just been through. That's when I knew I was awake for real. In my dream, I hadn't even thought to look over at the other side of the bed. I started to relax, but when I sat up to look at the bedroom door, I damn near screamed. There, under the door, was that same strip of light that I had seen in my dreams. It was the exact same image. It didn't make sense. Bonnie and I were alone, and every single light in the house was supposed to be off. For a second, I just stared, unsure of what to make of what I was seeing. But then I heard footsteps downstairs, clear as day. Someone was inside the house. Right away, I knew we were being robbed. Without another thought, I pulled out my phone and discreetly called the police. After telling them what was happening, I tiptoed over to the door just to make sure it was locked. Then, I crept back to Bonnie and gently woke her up, putting my hand over her mouth so she wouldn't accidentally make a noise. She didn't scream or anything when I told her, which was a huge relief. It felt like forever, but after a few tense minutes, the police arrived at the house. Things got loud downstairs. The police actually kicked in the front door, and there was a bunch of shouting. When I felt like it was safe to do so, I went downstairs just in time to see two masked men being ushered into a police car in cuffs. I talked to the officers for a bit and thanked them before going back upstairs. It was late, but Bonnie's parents rushed back from their trip early once they heard what had happened. They weren't even mad that I had stayed the night. After hearing my story, they were actually grateful. About a week after that, Bonnie called me with more information. The officers told her parents that the two men who had been arrested admitted to breaking in because they'd seen a Facebook post about their trip and didn't think anyone would be home. As odd as it sounds, thinking about the actual break-in doesn't bother me all that much. The reason I can't get this experience out of my head is because of that damn dream. I can accept that the noise of the break-ins made its way into my head somehow. That part's fine. But what I don't understand is the actual content of the dream. Bonnie thinks I have some unresolved demons lurking somewhere in my subconscious, but I don't like thinking about that possibility. And as for the door, I was lying down, so I wouldn't have been able to even see the door, let alone conjure up a perfect image of it in my head. I really don't know what to make of that, but that strip of light is something I see all the time. I can literally see it in my head now. I don't even have to be closing my eyes, which is even more troubling. It's not like it's obstructing my vision or anything, but it's always there in the back of my mind. I'm sure that image will go away eventually, but part of me is worried that it'll be seared into my head forever.
I was staying at a cabin in Canada. It's a family-owned lodge, nothing too big or fancy, just something my grandparents built and kept up with. So every now and again, someone in the family would enjoy a getaway there. This was just after the new year. I planned to stay 3 nights at the cabin. It was out in the middle of nowhere on some off-the-grid property that I had to get to by snowmobile, which was normal around this time of year. When I got there, I fired up the wood heater and set up my stuff in the bedroom. Within just 30 minutes, I started to feel the sense of relief that I was hoping for. Time felt to move slower out here, and there was nothing to crowd my mind with. I could just lay back and enjoy the peace and quiet. The rest of that day and night was nice. I got up in the morning at sunrise, making breakfast on top of the wood stove. Then I bundled up to head outside and grab more wood. When I opened the front door, I was taken aback. There were footprints in the snow, coming right up to the cabin. I immediately stepped outside and looked around. Then I followed them for a while. They led into the woods, with no signs of going toward the road, which was several miles away. How could they be way out here and not have taken a snowmobile? And why were they out here to begin with? I was really confused, especially with them having to have come up to the cabin during the middle of the night. Otherwise, I would have heard them in the morning. I got wood from the shed and brought it inside. I debated leaving, but I figured if they came by and didn't do anything, then it must have been an accident. Not to mention how much of a hassle it was to get to and from the cabin. It just would have made this trip a huge waste to leave now. I sat by the fire and just kept a lookout for the next couple hours. I didn't see anything. As the sun got higher and the temperature got warmer, I threw my jacket back on and wanted to go for a walk in the woods to pass the time. I decided I might as well take the opportunity to see if the footprints led anywhere. Maybe I'd find another cabin or something, which would put my mind at ease. I followed them into the woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes, not passing any signs of anything. It was just one continuous trail of prints in the snow going through the woods, until I suddenly heard something ahead of me. I whipped my head up and looked ahead. It was suddenly quiet, and everything was still, just endless trees and snow. I knew what I heard was the crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. I felt goosebumps all over my body, as I knew someone was out there in front of me, having to be hiding behind one of the trees. They probably just noticed me and quickly hid, maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I was. "Hello? Is someone out there?" There was no response, not even the slightest sound. As the tension grew, I felt like I had to do something. I decided to turn around and run back to the cabin. I packed everything as quickly as I could, locked up the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I don't know what happened at that cabin, or what was going to happen, but I have no doubt that that person in the woods was the same person who came by in the middle of the night. Them being on the way back to my cabin only shows that it was no accident. I haven't been back to the cabin after that. Every year, around the end of February, me and my good friend Justin take a camping trip to the same place. We both did a lot of backpacking and camping, but there was always something different and nice about camping in a snowy forest. With the right gear, it wasn't all that unsafe either. This year, we got there and set up our tents, built up a campfire, and enjoyed a couple drinks around the flames. It wasn't really that long after we got there that we suddenly heard something horrifying. It was this dark scream in the distance, echoing across the landscape. It only lasted a few seconds, then it went quiet again. Both of us jumped up from our chairs though, startled by it. It sounded too far for us to even have a chance at seeing who it was, but we looked in that direction anyway. Justin seemed to think that it had to be an animal just making an eerily human sound, because there was no way someone else was out here. I was pretty sure it had to be a person, but either way, we didn't really know what to do about it, other than wait and see if we heard it again. A while passed, and nothing else came. The sun started to set, and the temperature started dropping. We grabbed some more wood to put into the fire, and made food. But then, again, out of nowhere, that scream sounded. It was closer, like maybe only 200 feet away from where our camp was. Justin and I looked at each other, both thinking that we should probably check it out before the sun was fully set. I grabbed my knife just in case, and we both bundled up and headed into the woods. We tried to walk cautiously, unsure what exactly we were walking up on. We had maybe gotten 150 feet out, when we heard it one more time from almost right next to us. I stopped and stared in that direction, but there was nothing there. I glanced at Justin, and he seemed as worried as I was. We must have stood still and waited there for nearly 5 minutes before Justin started slowly stepping forward again. He passed a few trees when he suddenly stopped, and I could sense the fear through his body language. I stepped up next to him, and I almost threw up. There was a deer carcass laying in the snow, definitely having been put down recently. Then I felt Justin's hand tap on my shoulder. I lifted my gaze up, and standing across the forest, there was a person. He was just standing there, wearing hardly any winter clothing, and he was watching us, almost like he was observing us. Justin tapped on my shoulder harder, and I understood what he meant. Both of us left and hurried back to our camp. We didn't even speak as we packed our things in a rush and got out of the area. I don't think there's an explanation for what we saw, or who that was out there, or even if that was the person we heard screaming. After that, we stopped going to our camping spot and settled on a different area, hoping to never come across something like that again. It was the day before Christmas Eve. I had hopped in my car to do a few DoorDash deliveries, hoping the holiday season would bring in some better tips. It was around 11 p.m. when I got this order. It was a normal one, just a bag of food to drop off at their house. Most of my previous orders were actually grocery deliveries, probably because stores would be closing up for the next 2 days. The address on this one was far though, farther than I'd usually be willing to drive, but with not many other orders coming through, I took it anyway. It was lightly snowing outside, and the roads were very quiet, making the drive peaceful. The house was not in an average neighborhood though. When I pulled up to what I thought was going to be the entrance to the neighborhood, it was actually just a thin path through the trees, with a small cabin-looking home at the end. I pulled down and parked, getting out with the food. I walked up to the door and gave it a few knocks. Inside, I could hear chatter, like a group of people laughing and talking over each other. It sounded like so many people, I was actually confused on how they could all fit in such a small cabin. There was also something strange about the way it sounded that just didn't seem right. Something was off. Then the door opened. A man stood in front of me, and the contrast to what I expected had me put off for a second. The inside of the house was still, motionless. Nobody was running around, and most of the lights weren't even on. And yet, the sound of a huge holiday party was coming from the small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled at me. "Why don't you come bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." That was an odd thing to say. I began stuttering, trying to say no and make up an excuse, but the man interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by." All the while he was saying these strange and honestly creepy things, the chatter in the back of the cabin continued until it suddenly cut out. Just like that, the cabin was quiet. It was like a recording or tape had stopped playing. The man looked back for a moment, clearly not expecting that to happen, and before he could do anything, I dropped the bag on the porch and ran back to my car. I got in and drove away. I stopped doing deliveries for the night and just stayed home for the rest of the holidays. I know nothing actually happened at that cabin, but it's how disturbingly strange everything was, and the thought of what could have happened that still freaks me out. It was the day after Christmas, and I worked at a small family-owned grocery store as an overnight stalker. I'm not even sure why I was scheduled this night, because we were closed for Christmas, and it was probably really slow during the day, so there wasn't much for me to do as far as stalking. I spent the first hour filling what little needed to be filled on the shelves, but then I kinda just wandered around. As I was walking past the front of the store, I noticed a person outside, unusually close to the building for this time of night. It looked like he was just walking around, but he quickly noticed me looking at him, and instead of going away, he came closer to the window. He didn't say anything or try knocking, he just stared at me. I felt really uneasy and wasn't sure what to do. After a few seconds of him not looking away, I turned and walked away from the window. I guess I was just trying to play it off, like I wasn't bothered. That was very strange though, like no normal person acts like that. I waited a few minutes before going back to the front of the store and looking out the window. He was gone. I sighed in relief, then continued walking around the store to pass the time. I was just weaving in and out of the aisles, fixing up some of the shelves. Maybe 10 minutes had passed when I rounded the corner at the end of one of the aisles and immediately stopped walking. There were several boxes that had fallen off the shelves and were scattered on the floor. They weren't small things either that could have just tipped over. They had to have been knocked down or moved by someone. Just as I was trying to process it, I heard something from down the aisle. A soft but deep and eerie laugh, like a man quietly laughing right around the end of the aisle. It almost sounded unnatural, like a grown adult giggling like a child. Part of me thought about going to confront him, but when I remembered the man I saw by the window, they were fairly big and could have had something hidden in their jacket. I ran to the front and out the doors, getting in my car and calling the police. They pulled in 10 minutes later, and the man inside the store was gone. We later got hold of the security tapes and saw him find a way in through a side door, and as he hid behind the aisle, laughing at me, he held a knife in his hand, some kind of small switchblade. Cops think he wasn't sober, and I don't disagree, but I also don't think it changes anything. I could have died that night if things had gone any differently. It was New Year's Eve. I was never a big party person, but on big nights like these, I almost always got peer pressured into going out. This year, my friend was hosting a party at his place. He was kind of known as the rich friend because he had a big house with land and everything. My buddy Trav picked me up around 9 and we drove to the party. There were maybe 20 or 30 people there. Nothing too crazy, but enough to get me drinking more than I should have. We played some drinking games and watched the ball drop, and overall, it was a good time. Around 3 a.m. though, I was ready to leave, but I found Trav passed out on a bed upstairs. Figuring he, and probably nobody else here, was sober enough to drive, I went outside and ordered an Uber. It said they were 10 minutes away, so I sat down on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. His house wasn't really near any big roads. It was kind of away from everything. Nice and quiet, which was good for me to relax after a night like that. I just sat there and curled up under my jacket and waited for the ride for what felt like only 4 or 5 minutes when a car pulled up. "Uber?" the guy called out. I jumped up and got in, kind of startled by how I'd lost track of time like that. I guess I really was wasted. I got settled in the back seat and he started driving. The man looked like he was 50-ish, with short dark hair and a thick beard. "Big party tonight?" he asked. "Oh, yeah, I guess so," I responded, though I wasn't much in the mood for small talk. He glanced at me in the mirror, and something about the look he gave me just made me uncomfortable. I really don't know why. At the time, I thought I was just overthinking it. I put my head back and closed my eyes, trying to rest for the remainder of the ride. But only a minute later, my phone dinged. I opened my eyes, immediately making eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already looking at me. I awkwardly glanced away and pulled my phone out. My stomach tightened and my face went pale. It was a message from the Uber app, a text saying the driver just arrived at the pickup location, and a following text from the driver asking where I was. I looked back up at the mirror. The man's eyes were locked on me. I put my phone back in my pocket, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes again. Inside, I was freaking out and terrified, but I tried to play it off like I didn't know anything. 30 seconds later, I felt the car slowing down, and when I peeked out the window, I saw we were at an intersection with a red light. As soon as the car stopped, I opened the door and jumped out. Midway through getting out, he started driving, which made me fall on the pavement, but I got up and sprinted away. He drove off after that. I don't know who that man was, but seemingly he was going around on New Year's night and picking up random drunk people waiting for Ubers. There were so many signs I missed, like the fact we weren't even going in the direction of my home. I was just too out of it to think straight. Honestly, I never even should have gotten in the car without checking my phone. Where he would have taken me and what would have happened is unknown. It was the first weekend of February. I was at home, having the days off of work. Everything was pretty regular, but sometime in the middle of the day on Saturday, I thought I heard something from upstairs. It was a thud, just one, and not very alarmingly loud or anything. I'd never heard it before, which was the only reason I went up to see if I could figure out what it was. I didn't find anything, though. I wasn't worried, and hardly thought about it for the rest of the day. Hours later, and as I was winding down for the night, sitting on the couch and barely keeping my eyes open, there was another thud, almost identical to the last. Again, I looked around and saw nothing. I even opened the door to the spare bedroom, which was entirely empty, and looked around, not seeing anything. Maybe it was an animal on the roof, or just the house making strange noises. I went to bed that night, not too long after. The next day, I got up and went downstairs like usual to make coffee and breakfast. As I did, something felt off. Like as I walked around the kitchen and made breakfast, things seemed like they had been moved. The cereal and chips I had in the pantry just didn't look like they were where I'd left them. Obviously, I didn't purposefully try to remember the order they were in or anything, so I couldn't confirm it. I just had that weird feeling like it wasn't right, which I didn't know how it could be possible. I tried to pay more attention to things the rest of that morning, but eventually I forgot about it. I think I was caught up on how impossible it would have been, so I had to be mistaken. The rest of that day, I was downstairs, watching TV and doing some chores. It was just after sunset when I heard that same thud again. I stood up to go check on it, just like every time before, but as I approached the stairs, I heard a click. It was very quiet, but was definitely a click of some kind. I went up to the top of the steps and listened for a second, then looked around my bedroom, finding nothing. Then I went over to the spare bedroom, figuring I might as well check again. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it stopped halfway. It was locked from the other side. Blood rushed from my face, and my heart stung from the sudden panic. I took a few weak steps away from the door, feeling like my legs were giving out, but I brought myself together when I heard movement behind the door, approaching the other side. I started to run back down the stairs as I heard another click, followed by the door creaking open. I left out the front door and ran to the end of the street, where I called 911. When searching the home, they found no one, but in the spare bedroom closet, there were grocery bags and a blanket. Someone had been trying to live in there, at least for those 2 days, but probably even longer, without me knowing. Likely they were coming out at night while I was sleeping to go downstairs and eat and drink and do whatever. It sends chills through me just thinking about it. Thankfully, they seem to have left for good after that night. What they would have done had I found them is something I never even want to know. I was staying inside for the night. It was really cold outside, with a heavy snowstorm coming through our town. I had the TV playing my comfort show, and I was half asleep on the couch when I heard footsteps approaching outside my front door. Their boots were loud enough to get my attention and wake me up. I looked at the door, but they didn't knock. They stood there for a few seconds, then their boots took a couple more steps before it suddenly went quiet. It sounded like they stepped off the porch and into the snow, which I could no longer hear. Confused, I got up and looked out the window. The snowstorm was worse than I thought. It was almost completely white outside, making it hard to see more than a few feet past the window. Barely, I could make out shoe prints in the snow coming off of the porch. Why did they just step off the porch like that? And what were they even doing outside right now? With the weather, I couldn't really get any more answers. I checked out the side and back windows for any more shoe prints in case they walked around my house, but I didn't see much of anything. I went back to the couch and laid down. I felt it was weird, but I didn't want to overreact about it. An hour or so went by, and there was nothing else. The soft rumble of the snowstorm outside and the low volume of the TV made my eyes heavy, slowly putting me to sleep. When my eyes eventually opened, it was still very dark. The TV was on its timeout screen, showing it was 3 a.m. The snowstorm was still going strong, but strangely, it was much louder. As I continued to wake up, I began realizing it was extremely loud, like the sound was clear and crisp, not muffled by the windows. My eyes darted fully open and I got up. I turned on the light next to me, seeing water spots all over the room, going right to the front door, which was wide open. Snow was pouring into the house, and boot prints were outlined in the water going through the hallway. I could kind of make out the same boot prints leaving the house, but I wasn't sure. I got my phone and locked myself in the bathroom as I called for help. Turned out whoever broke in had already left. It seemed they came in and looked around for something specific, and after not finding it, they just walked back out into the blizzard. While they were in my home, they either somehow didn't notice me on the couch, or crept past me, quietly looking around my house without waking me. Even the idea of it creeps the hell out of me. I haven't had a good night's sleep after that, constantly waking up in the middle of the night, startled by every little creak. It was just before Christmas. School was out, but my parents still worked during the day. I was an only child, which meant I had the whole house alone and could do whatever I wanted all day while they were gone. This was just another weekday, I think Tuesday, and my parents left for work at 9. I immediately fired up my PC in my bedroom and started gaming. Strangely, only 15 or 20 minutes after my parents had left, there was a knock at the front door. Being young and not used to answering the door alone, I chose to ignore it. I tried not to make too much noise for the next little bit because I didn't want them to think anyone was home, hoping they would just leave. I didn't hear any more knocks, so I continued on with my day. I was playing video games for way too long, honestly, like 3 or 4 hours straight before I even got up from my desk to make some breakfast. I went downstairs and poured a bowl of cereal, then started walking back to bring it upstairs when I noticed the front door was unlocked. I thought that was weird because my parents always remembered to lock it and usually would leave through the garage anyway. I went over and slid the lock down, then went back up to my room. I think it was around 1 or 2 p.m. After finishing eating, I got right back to gaming. I had just reopened my game and loaded into a new match, so like only 3 minutes later, when I felt something shake my desk. I didn't hear anything, but I had my headset on, so it was unlikely I would have, unless it was really loud. It felt like a vibration though, which I'd usually only feel from my parents closing a door or something. I took my headset off and looked at the bedroom door, listening for what could have caused it. It was quiet. I got up and opened the door, then looked down the hallway toward the stairs, again listening for anything, and again not hearing anything. I was thinking it could have been the heater turning on, but I couldn't help but think how the door was unlocked earlier, and it just gave me an uneasy feeling. I walked over to the stairs, and just as I got to the top and looked down, I saw a shadow move near the bottom. I froze, and just a second later, the shadow stopped moving too, like they somehow saw me. My heart was pounding. I felt like I stood motionless for an entire minute before the shadow moved again. I could faintly hear footsteps walking toward the back of the house, and then the back door quietly open and close, and then silence. I ran to my parents' bedroom and called 911 with the home phone. Police came a few minutes later. This only seemed to get more disturbing and strange though. There were no signs of the intruder breaking in unless he had picked the lock on the front door. However, it was still locked when police arrived, which means he likely got inside sometime during the 3 to 4 hours I was gaming. I also think back to the knocks I heard right after my parents had left, but I just can't see what they were doing inside for that long. He was almost definitely in the house when I went downstairs and made myself a bowl of cereal though, maybe even watching me from another room, hiding somewhere. We don't know what his intentions were, but I've never truly felt safe again since that day. I worked at a gas station for 2 years, starting in 2015. During the winter on my first year, I had a regular customer come in a lot. I worked night shifts, so whenever anyone came in more than once, I'd usually recognize them. This guy was a trucker who told me his name was Paul. He was a really nice guy, though he definitely had something different about him. He was always smiley, like too smiley and happy, especially for it being the middle of the night. Sometimes I actually found it creepy. Anyway, one night he came in and he was acting differently. He walked in and greeted me, but as he looked around the aisles, his face was dull and almost angry. He picked out an energy drink and came up to the counter, and his face suddenly changed back to that overly happy look. I could see dread in his eyes though, making his smile seem even more fake and almost disturbing in a way. He paid and walked out to his truck, then drove off. I'd almost forgotten about it until the next day when I saw his truck pull in again. It was pretty cold and snowy outside. When Paul came in, he had that same look as yesterday, except he didn't smile at all. He grabbed the first drink on the shelf and came up to the counter. As he paid, he started asking me questions, like how busy it was tonight and when my shift was over. Then, before he left, he asked if I wouldn't mind helping him lift something in his truck. Having known him for so long now, I agreed, wanting to be helpful, and put on my jacket and followed him outside. The gas station was empty, aside from his truck, parked on the far side of the lot. I followed him over there, and he opened the passenger door, then walked around to the driver's side and got in. He said it was right up here, gesturing for me to get in as well. I climbed up and sat down. It was one of those big box trucks that had a door behind the seats for access to the cargo section. I looked at Paul. He had that strange, wide smile again. "It's just right in there. I'll follow behind you." He pointed at the door. I suddenly felt very unsettled and could sense that this wasn't what he said it was. I sat there, trying to figure out what to say or do, and I began to notice an odor. It was strong and disgusting, coming from whatever the hell was behind that door. I looked back up at Paul. His face was tense, but he held that smile and just watched me, waiting for me to move. I jumped back out of the truck, slamming the door behind me and hurrying back into the station. He didn't follow. As I was hurrying back though, I thought I heard him yell, like a frustrated yell coming from the truck. The wind covered most of the sound. He pulled out of the gas station soon after. I worked there for another year, and Paul never showed up again, not even once. I don't know what was back there, or what was really going on with Paul, but I think I was lucky to not have to find out. I was taking a road trip across the country to my family's house for Christmas. I know driving that long of distance during winter is probably not a great idea, but I couldn't find anyone to watch my dog, Frankie, so I had to bring him with me. He's just a little wiener dog, and I thought he'd be terrified of flying, so I decided to drive. The first half of the trip down there went well without any issues. Great weather, easy driving, and no problems. On the morning of the second part of the drive, though, I woke up to heavy downfall of snow. I packed up quickly and tried to outrun the weather, but it seemed to only get worse. Halfway there, I realized it was taking too long, and I wouldn't make it there by the end of the night, so I ended up choosing to find a motel to stay at instead. The road I was on was pretty empty. There wasn't much of anything, aside from the occasional gas station every 50 or so miles. So when I finally saw a sign for a motel, I immediately pulled off and into the parking lot. It was a very old-looking building, and most of the lights were off, but there was another car parked here, so I figured it had to be a worker. I left the car on for Frankie as I got out and walked through the blizzard and up to the main entrance. The door wouldn't open. I wiped the fog off the outside of the window and put my face closer, trying to look through and see if anyone was inside, but it looked dark and deserted. I wasn't sure what to think, but I didn't have much time before I heard Frankie barking. I looked back, seeing two men walking past my car and up to me. The way they walked, it was clear something was wrong. I tried to start walking back to my car and ignore them, but they cut me off. "Hey, was the place open?" No. I think it's closed tonight. Sorry," I said, trying to walk around them. "Do you think you could help us? We're having some car troubles. Maybe you could spare some gas." It was like they were fighting for any reason to keep talking to me. I said no, then backed up and made a wide walk around them, and even then, they still tried to get in front of me. I hurried back into my car as their footsteps crunched quickly behind me. By the time I got in and locked the doors, they were already at my window. Frankie was whining, and I couldn't blame him. This was really uncomfortable and kind of scary since we were so far out on a deserted road. One of them repeatedly knocked on my window, asking for help still, but it was so obvious that he didn't need any, and this was just some kind of trap or something. Before anything could get worse, I backed up and drove out onto the main road. After giving it some thought, I ended up dialing 911 to report their strange behavior. I got a call back from an officer 20 minutes later, saying they weren't at the parking lot anymore, and neither was their car. If that doesn't scream guilty, I don't know what does. Their car clearly worked enough for them to leave, and they apparently left right after I did. More so than my slight interaction with the men, it's the thought of what they were potentially trying to do that horrifies me. If anything had happened out there, I probably never would have been found.